This is a movement that is fundamentally anti-democratic at its core. If you really dig into the ideology, it really wants something different, an autocracy. And Trump is a leader, perfect leader for an autocratic movement because he doesn't follow the rules. He breaks the law. He's like moving the goalposts and moving them again and moving again. They're often referring to him like a King Cyrus or King David. They're not just going to destroy the social fabric. How is the stock market doing with these needless trade wars? They're going to raise the price of goods for everybody. They're destroying the international relations that have led to a measure of post-war stability. I mean, obviously not perfectly, but at least has sort of served in America's interests. They're destroying America's institutions. Trump is turning the Department of Justice into his own personal mob service. They're destroying consumer protection agencies. They're destroying Medicare. They're destroying institutions that Americans actually need and want.
Okay, welcome to Open Book. I am your host, Anthony Scaramucci. Joining us today is a New York Times best-selling author, Katherine Stewart. The title of the book is Money, Lies, and God, Inside the Movement to Destroy American Democracy. What a killer book this is. And first of all, thank you for coming on. But secondarily, I was moved by your book. And I know before we went live, I was also moved by Tim Alberta's book. I learned a lot from both these books. Yours is a little different. We'll get into it in a second. But let's start with you. What got you into this? Tell us a little bit about Katherine Stewart.
Thanks. I've been writing about this movement for 16 years, and it really started on a playground in Santa Barbara, California, when I learned that a program called a Good News Club was coming to our daughters, our children's public elementary school. This is an evangelistic program that aims to convert children who are too young to read.
Hey, everyone. It's Anthony Scaramucci here with some straight talk. Let me tell you, we've got 85% of our viewers who haven't hit the subscribe button yet. What's up with that? It hurts. Listen, I made my career by going all in. Right now, only 15% of our viewers are part of our subscribed family. So please take action. This helps us book more amazing guests. Hit subscribe, join our community, and let's turn these numbers upside down. Now back to the show.
In a really reactionary form of evangelical Christianity, as we know, evangelicalism is really diverse. But the interesting thing about this program is that the evangelical parents at our school didn't want this program coming to it. They offered them free and better space in the church, literally next door to the school. Montecito Covenant Church, absolutely beautiful church. And the Good News Club leaders declined. They insisted on being in the public school. And what they're doing is they're confusing young kids into thinking that their school endorses a particular form of the Christian faith because public schools have a cloak of authority in the minds of very young kids. So this was really astonishing to me. I thought, what do my evangelical friends know that I don't know about this organization? And why do they need to be in the school as opposed to that lovely church next door? And how is it legal and constitutional for them to be operated in public elementary schools in the first place, given the First Amendment and the separation of church and state? So I started researching the legal advocacy world of the religious right, that sort of feature of the larger, I would call it a Christian nationalist movement. And that really set me down the path of investigation. And what I discovered over time is that, this group was one part of a much larger sort of element of the movement that really is taking aim at public education as a pillar of democracy. But that sort of hostility to public education is just one small feature of a much larger movement that was really trying to reframe our country and turn it into something different.
So most of these states were founded, colonies founded on religious tolerance. I mean, there were people that were moving into Pennsylvania. They were Dutch. Some of them were Amish, and they wanted to have a different identity from various different Christian sects. And so they did that. And then there was a successful revolution. And then there was a Bill of Rights. And guess what the first one is freedom of speech and free religion. So what am I missing? Like, why would somebody want to impose their religion on you? What's going on in their head?
Well, they have this very, the contours of their idea are really that the US is founded not on any principles, they're principles of tolerance and pluralism and equality, but more on a specific religion and cultural heritage. They have this idea that America is really on the brink of an apocalypse, thanks to the rise of equality and pluralism and what they call the radical left, which is, by the way, includes a lot of conservatives and rhinos, anyone remotely not on board with their agenda. They have the idea that democracy won't be able to solve the problems, and the idea that, therefore, the rules really don't apply anymore. So what we need is a strong man, an authoritarian leader who puts himself above the law and who's going to scrap, the rule of law, basically seize the reins of power in favor of the iron fist. So it's really, in sum, the idea that democracy, in the sense of the government, is representative of the people, of the people, by the people, and for the people, respecting individual rights and true religious freedom in a pluralistic society. It's this sense that this kind of government doesn't work and that they want to smash it up and create something new. And, this is emphatically not the idea of Thomas Jefferson and Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln and so many others who actually helped create America as we know it. It's as anti-American as it gets.
So, listen, your book scared me, and I'm going to tell you why it scared me. There's more people every year that want to be the people that you're writing about, Katherine. Meaning, if I said to you, the rate of change, the slope is for more intolerance as opposed to more tolerance. And they're also smart. They're smart. They're doing what the Republicans did with Operation Red Map. They're figuring out a way to legally infiltrate their message. React to that. Am I wrong? Tell me.
You're absolutely right. In many instances, they're using the tools of democracy to destroy democracy, but they're also using tactics that I think are frankly craven, like the spread of misinformation. This is the key to so much of the story. That's why I put the word lies right in the center of the title of my book. If you can separate a certain number of people from the facts, it makes them so much easier to control. So, I've spent a lot of time over the 16 years in these spaces. I go to right-wing conferences and strategy gatherings and, places like America Fest or Road to Majority Conference, where you can really hear movement leaders and strategists talking amongst themselves and not just signaling to the rest of us. And you also gotten to know a lot of the rank and file. A lot of these people are frankly really nice people. They love their families. They care about their communities. And they think they're doing what's really right for America. They think they're saving our country from a demonic woke Borg. Mm-hmm. But, they've also been massively disinformed. One good way to demonstrate the crucial role of this misinformation and conspiracism really is to ask Americans some really basic factual questions. You ask them, was the 2020 election stolen? What percentage of the US is Black or gay or Jewish? What percentage of wealth is concentrated at the top 1%? Or what was, say, the inflation rate in the US versus other countries? Following the pandemic, did the economy grow under the former president? And the answers to these questions will really show that they do not really, they've been misinformed by the facts. They live in a fantasy world where Trump won the 2020 election by a landslide and Blacks and trans people add up to a majority of the population and are sucking the government dry, where Jews are 30% of the country or something like that, where the Biden economy was a hellhole. So these sort of conspiracy gatherings that I've covered in my book, Money, Lies, and Guides, such as America Fest, I'm sure you read that chapter, where it's this, you go into these spaces, there are thousands of people at mega churches around the country. They're sort of like Trump rallies, but Trump doesn't show up. But one of his sons usually does to speak. They're, organized by Mike Flynn and some of Trump's other most devoted allies. you walk in, you hear about the great replacement, and they're trying to microchip you. And, anybody, there's like a lot of people like rhino hunting t-shirts. They're really like very hostile toward insufficiently loyal Republicans, as you know. and and there's a lot of very, violent language. I think the language creates the permission structure for political violence. But more than that, these folks who are attending these gatherings are just massively disinformed. It's, they're hit with every, 666 is emblazoned on the World Health Organization's front door. And I mean, it's every conspiracy imaginable, and it's really intended to confuse people. It's, as Steve Bannon said, flooding the zone with, and then he used the S word. And that sort of turns people around and is really about cultivating in them this fear, and then holding out the promise of this, magical savior on a white horse, Donald Trump, who, according to them, never did anything wrong, is this sort of perfect person who's going to battle the forces of evil. So we're really dealing with, it sounds fantastical, but if you go into these spaces, it's like entering a world of total disinformation and conspiracism. Other reporters have written about these things. You can watch a lot of the speakers on YouTube. So it's actually happening. It's not hiding. It's like a lot of folks just have not been listening.
So, okay, I mean, yeah, this is an obvious question, and I'm sure you've answered it 100 times. So, Mr. Trump, President Trump, is a serial adulterer. He's married 3 times. He's broken the law. He's been a sexual aggressor. He's convicted felon in the state of New York for transgressions related to bribery and hush money payments. And so how do they reconcile all that with the perfect white knight in shining armor? And how does he get away with that, honestly? I mean, and I'm going to take notes here because I think people would like to get away with it, wouldn't they? I mean, how does he do it?
I mean, gosh,
I don't want to get away with it, Katherine. I'm just saying that to make you laugh.
It's working. Well, I mean, listen, part of it is transactional. In the run up to the 2016 election, I've been writing about this movement for a long time, and I would go to these gatherings, and some of the leaders of the religious right, you could tell in the beginning they wanted Ted Cruz. There were a couple of folks like, who actually couldn't say his name, but it was clear that he had like the popular touch. He really channels the aggression of his followers, and he says, when they're coming for me, they're coming for you, and I'm fighting for you, like that kind of thing. But the leaders of the religious right, so the Christian nationalist movement, let's just pull back for a second, much of it functions as a giant voter turnout machine. They've got, the relational organizing. They do it through churches. They do it through like trusted members of the community. He needed to get them on board. So he made a deal. He gathered in 2015, I think it was the summer, at a Marriott in New York City with 1,000 evangelical pastors. And he held up a list of potential Supreme Court justices, like shiny new bonds. And he said, I'm going to choose from this list, and all of them are pro-life. So that has been a really long-standing aim of the movement. Then he said, I'm going to have an evangelical advisory council, and I'm going to choose Mike Pence as my VP. And those 3 promises helped to solidify their support for him. So they really turned out their voter turnout machine on his behalf. And sometimes I'd hear at these gatherings, these speakers of the leaders of the movement speak and tell their people, we don't need a savior. We already have a savior in Jesus Christ. We need a leader. And this election is about judges, because it's the legal advocacy sphere that I referenced earlier. You've got the Federal Society, and you've got a range of sort of, I would say, Christian nationalist legal advocacy groups like the Alliance for Defending Freedom, Liberty Council, First Liberty Institute. There are hundreds of millions of dollars that flow into this every year, right-wing legal ecosphere. A lot of money buys a lot of judges, but they know that if you can control the courts, you can impose policies on the rank and file that they might not necessarily want. So, for instance, most Americans, actually, Republican and Democrat alike, support abortion rights, at least in some form. I know from personal experience that you, if abortion is totally illegal, it makes childbirth much more dangerous, because when things go wrong, as has happened to me, I needed an abortion to save my life during a miscarriage, and it was delayed because it was, for faith-based reasons. It's bad, and we're already seeing women across the country in states that ban abortion dying because of this. These bans. ProPublica is doing a pretty good job of finding and telling some of these stories. But, they still have this, absolutist, no abortion ever for any reason, etc. take. And so they know if they get the courts, I'm sorry for the digression, but they know if they can get the courts, they can get the country. But there is more to it than that. This is a movement that is fundamentally anti-democratic at its core. If you really dig into the ideology, as I've done in my 3 books on this topic, and especially in Money, Lies, and God, you can see that this is a movement that doesn't believe in democracy. It really wants something different, an autocracy. And Trump is a leader, perfect leader for an autocratic movement, because he doesn't follow the rules. He breaks the law. He's like moving the goalposts and moving them again and moving again. Pretty sure soon they're not even on the playing field. And, they're often referring to him like a king Cyrus or King David.
But trust me, that's what he wants. That's why a lot of us who love democracy and love the frailty of human beings, ourselves included, and accept that frailty, don't want that. We know that always ends in terror. But let me just ask you this, because I'm fascinated by the book. I know the answer, but because I read your book, but I want you to tell the people that are listening. Give me the utopia for them. So come down with the tablets and tell me what the perfect America is for the Money, Lies, and God group of people. What does it look like?
It's interesting. The movement seems to emphasize a return to some kind of imaginary version of an allegedly better past, a past that includes element of a regressive social order, such as gender hierarchy, the suppression of certain forms of speech, attacks on religious freedom of those who don't conform, among other features. It's a kind of vision that never really existed the way that they think it did. So, what is this, an America made great again? It's funny, because when they talk about the past, the elements of the past that they really like, often they'll hearken back to the good old days of the 1950s. Well, let's think about what was happening in the 1950s. Tax rate at the top was a lot higher than it is today. The average CEO in America could have a very nice standard of living, but they weren't making many hundreds of times the amount of their average worker, that's people actually living in American work. So, they're sort of hearkening back to a fictitious fantasy, an unrealistic fantasy about a golden age of yore. And I think of these folks as nihilists, because their vision is really not based on reality. It's based on, it's like retreating into a fantasy that is projected onto the past.
All right. There are 5 groups in this book. There are funders. There are thinkers. There are sergeants. There are power players. And there are foot soldiers. Now, so let's go through each one of them, okay? Tell me what a funder is.
So in this group, I pay a lot of attention to funders. There are a lot of very wealthy people in America, but only a sector are funding this movement. So, a lot of wealthy people really believe in democracy and are trying to defend it. But there is a sector of extremely wealthy oligarchs, I would call them, because there's been this sort of massive concentration of wealth over the last decades at the tippy top of the economic spectrum. And they are investing in anti-democratic projects. I'm talking about people like, just to name a few names, Barry Side or the Corkerys or Sean Filer or Tim Dunn or the Wilkes brothers or the DeVos Prince family juggernaut. Here's the thing about these folks. Some of them are evangelical, some are Protestant, some are Catholic, some are Jewish, some are frankly atheistic. But they all agree that, I think they tend to be more motivated by economic reasons than cultural reasons. Some of them are more culturally motivated than others, but some of them really don't seem to care at all about the culture wars that they're helping to fund. Because the culture wars are really just the shiny baubles to get the little people on board, right? They want no regulation for their businesses, especially if they're in environmentally sort of businesses that are involved in any kind of environmental exploitation, degradation. They want lower taxes for the rich. They say they believe, some of them, in free markets. They just want capitalism and let the markets do their thing. At the same time, they want protective policies for their monopolistic businesses. They want privileged government contracts, and they want tax breaks. I'm looking at you, Elon Musk. So I think a lot of them, some of them are really motivated by cultural reasons too. They think we need to keep an unruly public in line with religion, but some of them just see the religious nationalism as the cost of doing business, right? Then I think about the thinkers, many of whom are associated with the New Right, a movement that's, I would say, less explicitly Christian nationalist and more explicitly anti-democratic. Some of them actually derive key ideas from Nazis, like the Nazi political theorist Carl Schmitt, who came up with this idea of what I would call the permanent state of emergency. We're in an apocalyptic threat, because of liberalism and pluralism, and so the rules don't apply. We need a strong man who's going to take care of it for us. It's really kind of a disgraceful idea, very anti-democratic. Then I also pay a lot of attention to the sergeants, who are these very sort of political pastors who play a really important role in turning out congregations to vote for anti-democratic candidates. And I pay a lot of attention to the power players, the sort of high-level strategists, people like Ralph Reed, and I would call Charlie Kirk now a high-level strategist, or Bob McEwen of the Council for National Policy. They're sort of directing the infrastructure of this movement. And finally, the foot soldiers. And again, a lot of these people, it's a very large, diverse group, ethnically diverse, frankly, religiously diverse too. And a lot of them have, to some degree, I would say, you've got a lot of evangelicals, white evangelicals, very reliable, but the movement is drawing new energy from a sector of like Pentecostal and charismatic movements, which are both multiracial and transnational movements, and also easily given over to sort of hard right politics. And they've got a lot of different interests and ideas. When you peel away some of the culture war stuff, they generally want a better deal for themselves and for the workforce. But they're manipulated by, movement leaders to vote for these culture wars that get them on board with the larger anti-democratic agenda.
I think you're explaining it beautifully, which is really the reason why I'm not interrupting you. I think that the problem I'm having is, I think it's a problem you're having, as you sort of expressed that you're having it in the book, is that even if they get exactly what they want, it's never enough, constant crisis. And if they get exactly what they want, they're going to blow up the social fabric of the society. So it'll end up in some kind of tumult, which will lead to less tolerance by everybody. Look, if I'm Elon Musk and I'm worth $400 billion, I guess I need to be worth $1 trillion because I can spend that money. Of course, I can't spend the money. And then if it costs the weakening of the social contract and the social fabric of the society for me to plunder enough from the society to get to $1 trillion, I guess let me say it differently. I don't want to live in a barbed wire security mansion, Katherine, while my fellow neighbors
You
are
don't?
suffering. I don't.
Who's going to take care of you? And how do you know, your staff isn't going to turn on you?
I've been to Latin America, and the staff does turn on people there.
Yeah.
And so I guess what I'm saying is that the whole thing is anti-Christian. The whole thing. So tell me what I'm missing. Tell me, I don't know. I think the big problem with your book and Tim Alberto's book is the disbelief. You know, you've lived it, you've sat with these people, you've worked with them. And the reason I wanted to have you on the show is I want you to tell people who find this so illogical and find this so nonsensical that they actually don't believe it or they sweep it under the rug. I want you to break the glass, pull the fire alarm, and tell them why they should be concerned about what you're saying.
Yeah, just look at what's happening. You know, they're not just going to destroy the social fabric. They're going to destroy the economy. They're going to destroy they are destroying. I mean, how is the stock market doing with these needless trade wars? They're going to raise the price of goods for everybody. You know, think about they're destroying the international relations that have, led to a measure of post-war stability. I mean, obviously not perfectly, but at least has sort of served in America's interests and led to certain kinds of non-proliferation agreements. And when it comes to nuclear weapons, they're destroying America's institutions. Trump is turning the Department of Justice into his own personal mob service. They're destroying consumer protection agencies. They're destroying, Medicare. They're destroying institutions that Americans actually need and want. They're, keen on eliminating public education the way that we know of it. I think that this movement is fundamentally nihilistic. Their aim is to destroy rather than to create. By their actions rather than their actual words. For all of their religion talk, they're denying that there's any real value or truth in this world. They see the idea of truth as just another casualty in a political war. They don't mind spreading lies. I actually think it's really important to pay attention. I've, written my 3 books to try to warn people about this. What we're seeing, especially I think in the international realm, follows a classic pattern with the rise of authoritarian leaders. They need to channel their aggression and rage, and the rage of their constituents on others. So, authoritarians have a long history of engaging in futile expansionist projects and declaring war with people who were formerly friendly neighbors. So, when we look at what's happening to the NATO alliance, to Canada, Greenland, they're falling victim to the same malevolent forces that are already attacking American democracy.
Okay, it's very well said. The book is incredibly well researched, and hopefully we can all find a way forward. You put some prescriptions in the book related to that. What my producer and I do at the end of each of these podcasts is we come up with 5 words, and we pick them from your book. And you got to give us a reaction to these words. Okay, you ready?
1 word reaction or sentence?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, free form. We're going to freestyle here. All right, Katherine? You're good at taking directions, Katherine. I do notice that. I'm impressed. Okay, are you ready? I say the word money. You say what?
Broligarchy.
Yeah, wow. Okay, that's a really good one. I may steal that from you, actually. I'm writing that one down.
Yeah.
Okay, I say the word religion. You say what?
I can't do 1 word thing. Diverse. Yeah, religion is really diverse.
You can give me a couple words. Because when I hear the word religion, I think compassion on one side. I think prayer and faith. But then I also think power. And I also think ideological struggle.
Yes. Well, there you go. That's great. I think we should also think about what religious freedom really means. Religious freedom is the right and the freedom to worship any god or sacred idea or none. It's the freedom to worship if you want to, but the freedom from religious coercion and the freedom from having to, basically support another faith, particularly a faith that holds you in contempt with your money if you don't want to. And this is a movement that, I think right now we're seeing in the Trump administration the sort of big moves that are more sort of a consequence of new right ideology. I think they're laying the groundwork for the sort of Christian nationalist agenda, which will be coming next.
Power. I say the word power.
Wow. I mean, this is a movement that worships power. They worship power. That's why
And they want it.
They want power. They want power.
They crave it.
They crave
right?
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I say the word authoritarian.
I think about the new alliances that Trump seems to be drawn to. An alliance. There was, I think, a piece very recently that showed he's more allied in terms of his ideas of leadership with Russia and Turkey. I mean, and you look at the way Russia and Turkey exploit religion for politics and power. You could describe their countries as theocratic in a certain fake sense, and that there's an official religion, and or Iran. Let's look at Iran. Their laws are based on their holy texts, supposedly a certain interpretation of them, but they're more accurately described as cronyist kleptocracies with absolute suppression of free speech and no tolerance for political opposition. And that's, I believe, what America it could be headed to if I would say the majority of us sort of democracy-loving folks don't step up.
Okay, and the next and last word, democracy.
Democracy is worth fighting for. The principles of equality, the idea of a government of the people, for the people, and by the people, the idea that our laws should be deliberated in public, that our laws should apply equally to all, the idea that, power should be held to account is really vital. It's fragile, but it's also really beautiful. I mean, there's democracy has laid the foundations for, innovation and stability and freedoms that never perfectly applied, but we've by and large enjoyed, has made us.
The great irony in your book is that the democracy has allowed these people to have this movement. The democracy has allowed these people to be who they are, and as a result of which they want to take that away from other people. And that's one of the big messages that you put into this book, which I really greatly admire.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So I really appreciate you joining us. Title of the book is Money, Lies, and God. The Unholy Trinity, right? Money, Lies, and God. The title of the book is Money, Lies, and God. For me, the Unholy Trinity. Inside the Movement to Destroy American Democracy. Thank you so much, Katherine Stewart, for joining us on Open Book.
Thank you so much.
Hello?
All right, you sound good. You want to come on the podcast now? You feeling good?
No, I had a call with Doctor, but go ahead, give me the podcast.
All right, you ready?
Do it.
All right, you ready?
I'm
Okay,
ready.
Ma. So I had a guest on that was talking about the evangelical Christian right. You know, those people that come on the infomercials on a Sunday?
Yeah, well, Salvo's evangelica.
All right. So what do you think of this, Mom? What do you think of the religious evangelical movement?
I think it's a cult.
You think it's a cult, right? You don't like it, right?
It's a recruiting religion. They recruit people.
Okay. And so you disagree with the philosophy, right?
They go to the weakness. They go to the weakness.
They go to weakness in people. Okay, so you don't like it, but you're
people that are poor too.
all right. But the Catholic, you're a Catholic, Ma. You go to church all the time. The Catholics don't do that, or the Catholics are okay?
They don't do that at all. It's crazy. They have to get baptized with their clothes on in a tub.
Okay.
I know the religion.
All right. So you don't like the evangelical movement, but you do think that they try to impose their religion on other people. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah. Right, you're right. And they carry the Bible with them to let you know that they're so good. They're not good. Some of them are evil.
I really do love you, Ma. Okay, just don't ever change, Ma. I know you're 88.
How can I change?
No, I mean, you're 88 years old. Why would you change now? Why would you change perfection, Mom? And the operating software and the algorithm. Why would you change it now when it's so beautifully rendered? Why would you change it, right?
Thank you.
All right. Hey, thank you for watching this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, here's another one right up here that you might like.
If President Biden, who I think had done really good things, was much more forceful and took more risk in the Ukraine, Harris might be president now.
In what way? What would have been more risk?
Well,
Allow them to use the missiles earlier?
Yeah, I think he could have actually said, President Putin, I'm 82 years old. This is it. We have to stand up for something, and I'm not going to pussyfoot around him. There needs to be risk-taking, especially when you're dealing with dictators and bullies, because that's the language they understand. And I don't think we were forceful enough.
Joining us now on Open Book is Professor Edward Goldberg. He's an NYU professor here in New York City. He's also an author of the book, The United States as Global Liberal Hegemon, How the U.S. Came to Lead the World. It's a fascinating exposition of a lot of different things going on in here. Of course, I love the book for a number of different reasons. Number one, before we started, I talked a little bit about Thomas Hobbes. We'll get into that, but also Dr. Kissinger is somebody that I've always admired. And without Dr. Kissinger, of course, I would have never been introduced to von Metternich and the whole treaty, the Congress of Vienna, which he wrote about in the early part of his career. But let's start with you, sir. Before we start on the book, tell us about your background and your career, if you don't mind. And thank you for joining the show.
Yeah, for sure. I started out actually in international business and international trade finance. And about 14, 15 years ago, I started to write some op-ed pieces, eventually wrote more pieces, wrote my first book, and NYU asked me to join the faculty, and I basically left trade finance to teach international political economy at NYU Center for Global Affairs.
That's a pretty fascinating, but why this book then, sir, and why now?
Okay, good question. I always, what has been in my mind for a long, long time is why the U.S. is considered the leader of the world and who made it the leader of the world. Actually, the original title of the book, before Paul Gray Macmillan's editors changed it, was Who Anointed America? And who chose us to be the leader of the world and why? And interestingly, when I first started the book, I was kind of not so sure that it was a good thing for America to be the hegemon. Hegemon's the Greek word for leading power. And I thought maybe it's not such a good thing. I mean, I'm a kid of Vietnam. The Vietnam era. And, there were a lot of mistakes and a lot of people got hurt. And I thought, why are we doing this? What's in it for us? As I started to look at the history of it, as I started to look at the benefits of it, the world needs someone to organize it. And the world needs a liberal force, meaning not the current pundit word for liberal that's used all over the place, but the traditional word for liberal, meaning someone who believes in individual freedom and in free markets. The world needs a liberal force to lead it. And there's, frankly, no one else.
Well, when we hear hegemonic, though, sometimes there's a pejorative to that word as well, right? There's the hegemon, when you say global power, it also could potentially mean control, right? And there's a hint of imperialism around it. But you don't really mean it that way, right? How do you mean it?
I mean it with the liberal term in front.
Right. Okay. Okay. So the reason why I reference Hobbes, there's a very famous paragraph in the Leviathan. It's interesting because you were mentioning Jonathan Swift as we were getting started, and of course there's John Locke,
right,
and there's Thomas Hobbes, and so they're all interesting characters. Swift being more of the satirist of the three of them, but what Hobbes said, which has always left an impression on me, is that the world is at its greatest level of peace when there is one global hegemon that uses its military might to put down the internecine tribal conflicts in the world. And then he went on to describe Pax Romana and then, of course, Pax Britannia
Right.
as two examples of this. And so the question I have for you is America that still today?
Definitely economically. Definitely, I have a chapter in the book about the power of the Federal Reserve. And the power of the Federal Reserve has more or less become the world's fire station for putting out economic fires. It's actually kind of usurped the role of the IMF dealing with major problems. So, yes, economically, and yes, because of the role of the US dollar in reserve currency. It's hard to do it. It's hard to be the liberal hegemon today without allies. And it's not Pax Romana, it's not Pax Great Britain, where they could move around the world and play any game they wanted. We need allies, and allies are a force multiplier. And it's interesting, in today's semi-globalized world or globalized world, whatever you want to call it at the moment, it's the allies who more or less select who the liberal hegemon is going to be. I mean, we don't force France or Germany into the coalition. They in a way chose us, as did Japan, as did Australia, as did the Netherlands, and you can go on and on.
Okay, makes sense. In the book, you write a lot about balance of power, and you write about the need for, I guess, the world when you have a balance of power. It's almost like a form of deterrence, right? You don't have one group that goes to attack the other group if they feel like there's other balancing things on the other side. And obviously, I don't know, just going off of your book, since 1945, we've done a pretty good job of balancing power. Is that fair to say?
Well, we definitely had somewhat of a balance of power with the Soviet Union based on, the MAD concept. Back to
Yep.
John von Neumann's thinking of mutual assured destruction. And that basically worked until the wall fell down. Now, I'm not advocating the wall being built up to have a new balance of power, for sure not. But the MAD policy more or less worked. But the MAD policy was very interesting because it was based on the rationality of your opponent. If your opponent was a true ideologue and didn't care that they would destroy the population, of course, the MAD theory doesn't work.
Okay. Let me ask you this though. In light of what happened with the Ukraine, was there a fault in the system? Is that something that America could be blamed for? Is that something that should not have happened? And if it should not have happened, what could we have done geopolitically to have prevented it from happening?
Well, I think, once again, we have to look at the fact that since 1648, in the end of the 30 Years' War, there's been called the Westphalia Treaties on the idea of sovereignty. One country doesn't invade another country, very simply put. I mean, that's what World War II was about. In 94, I'm sorry, Russia, the Federation of Russia signed the Budapest Memorandum, guaranteeing the territorial independence of the Ukraine on the concept that Ukraine would give back the nuclear bombs that were stored there during the Soviet Union times. Ukraine gave back the bombs. They signed, the agreement was signed. It was co-assured by the US and the UK. Then Russia invades the Crimea. The world basically did very little. Russia then decides to invade the basic Ukraine. We, in a way, we gave them arms, but we gave them arms with one hand tied behind their back. I mean, I could even theorize that if President Biden, who I think had done really good things, was much more forceful and took more risk in the Ukraine, Harris might be president now.
In what way? What would have been more risk?
Well,
Allow them to use
I, yeah, I think
the missiles earlier?
yeah, I think he could have actually said, President Putin, I'm 82 years old. This is it. We have to stand up for something, and I'm not going to pussyfoot around him. Now, obviously, he did the prudent thing. I'm not saying he was prudent, but I think there needs to be risk taking, especially when you're dealing with dictators and bullies, because that's the language they understand. And I don't think we were forceful enough.
Okay. But we have been pretty forceful over the years, though, right? I mean, we were forceful in the whole Bosnia Herzegovina situation. We were forceful.
We were there, but then, and I mentioned this in the book, I think Obama made a huge mistake when he made a red line and didn't live up to it. If you're the liberal hegemon, by definition, in one way or the other, you have to be the cop, as you mentioned before. And if a cop doesn't give out tickets, no one respects a cop. You're going to speed on the New York State Thruway if you never get a ticket.
Yeah, I just find the whole conversation fascinating because we're now shifting. It feels like the Charles Lindberghs and the Huey Longs that were trying this idea of isolationism 80 years ago have won. Now, they've won narrowly. It feels like Donald Trump is saying that, quote unquote, we're in forever wars and we need to retrench and pull back and so forth. And I guess what I'm wondering is, do you think he means that? Do you think that we will maintain our status as what I would describe as being leader of the free world? Or what do you think?
You know the man a little better than I do, okay? But, I hope he's just playing poker. I think he's playing a very dangerous game of poker. I mean, I don't know if you can retreat out of the world anymore. It's not the 1920s. It's not Charles Lindbergh. The economy is now basically globalized. Globalized for the economy, I mean, we're no longer in an industrial economy. Industrial economies are passé. We're a human capital economy. Fixed assets are not as important, how many steel mills you have. What's important is how many Silicon Valleys you have. Once again, human capital. And the Silicon Valleys need to do business all over the world. Google needs to do business all over the world. Facebook needs to do business all over the world. I don't know how you can retract from those markets anymore, as the global economy has changed to be an economy of human capital.
But I mean, yes, and I agree with everything you just said. But I guess there's a broader and perhaps existential point that I'm asking you to respond to. Our grandfathers, and in some cases our great grandfathers, said, "Okay, the First World War didn't end so well. We botched the treaty. The League of Nations failed. We asked for too many reparations from the Germans. They responded with this perversity of dictatorship and nationalism, which ended up as National Socialism and ultimately ethnic cleansing and obviously, anti-Semitism." There's feelings like that right now in our society. At least I feel that way. And I'm wondering if there's anybody like our grandparents or the George Marshalls of the world, or, Dean Atkinson, the Secretary of State for Truman, the Truman Doctrine, any of these things, that you write about it brilliantly in the book. The ideas to get us to this status, are they now being denounced? Are there still enough people in the world, or at least in America, that believe that this is important? Is it important?
Yeah.
Should somebody else take our place, or what do you think?
There's honestly no one else to take our place as a liberal hegemon. Obviously, there's the Chinese or the Russians would like to take our place or share in hegemonic power. But for sure, they're not what we consider our model of liberal capitalism. So is there a voice here in the United States? I somehow, it has not been expressed correctly. Biden, who did some, I think, very positive things on building allied relationships and strengthening the idea of the hegemon, wasn't able to voice it to the American people. He lacked that leadership skill. Tony Blinken was a great Secretary of State in that respect, was not able to sell it to the American people. So we have a vacuum in terms of leadership there now. It's interesting, I think, and fascinating that our new Secretary of Treasury has been pretty much an internationalist all his life and a globalist.
Yeah.
So he's the one person that stands out in the new administration.
Interesting. I mean, I'm just fascinated with all of this because I feel like, and I don't know how you feel about this, Professor, but I feel like I'm a direct beneficiary of the thought process of these men, mostly men, at the end of the Second World War. They set out the GI Bill. They put in place a system. They put in place a system that led to great prosperity. They created the Marshall Plan, which was counterintuitive, but it fortified those democracies and protected them from Joseph Stalin, which made bigger markets for our goods, which allowed our blue-collar workers to get high wages in the late 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s before the inflation started. And what am I missing? Am I wrong about any of that?
I totally agree with you. I'm trying to recall the title of Dean Acherson's book, There at the Creation.
Present at the creation. Present at the creation.
I mean, you had a group of individuals, Marshall, Acheson. It's an amazing team. George Kennan,
Yep.
part of that team.
Yep.
You can go on and on. And you had Harry Truman, not a Harvard-educated person, but a very wise and pragmatic person bouncing that team. And it really put together the world that we had. And now we're saying, possibly because of the rapidness of technological change that society is not used to, possibly because that technological change put a part of the system into severe economic injustice, possibly because of the how rapidly cultural changes in the United States. For many various reasons, we're saying, hey, let's throw that system out.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I'm flabbergasted by it. I am totally flabbergasted by it and don't understand the mood of the country at the moment.
It's almost like we forgot what got us here. That's the thing that I don't understand. And there's it requires leadership, and it feels like there's a lot of adversarial propaganda that's in the system that a lot of people have bought into, where they are, I don't know, they're peeing on the U.S. You know what I mean, which sort of makes it. I don't know. It bothers me. But to your point, I don't see the leadership explaining to the American people the virtues of all this. And it feels like the American people 80 years ago, after fighting that war, didn't need the explanation. The explanation was prima facie. So what would have to happen to renew this, I guess, is the question.
Sadly, I think to renew it, is we're going to need a crisis. It's funny. I've thought a lot about this. How do you unite folks in a democracy? You unite them through crises. I was always surprised with George Bush after 9/11. The weeks after 9/11, he had the whole country that he could have led and didn't do something like a gas and oil tax or something like that when he could have. And everyone, no one would have been against him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And FDR, of course, was the master of using crises to build coalitions.
Mm-hmm.
So, unfortunately, in a democracy, I think that's what you need, a crisis.
The world faces these new problems, right? We have climate change out there, pandemics, financial challenges, this threat to our political culture that you and I are describing. Let's say I made you the czar. Let's say I said, okay, you're a great student of history. You understand what's worked for us and what hasn't. Given everything that I just said, what would you recommend to the country? Let's say that you were sitting before the new president or a group of leaders in the Senate. What would you recommend?
Ooh, that's a tough one. First, actually, something basic. Civics should be taught again.
Mm-hmm. Yep, no question. Yep.
Basic. Second of all, that we rethink Ronald Reagan's executive order about limiting the fairness doctrine in communication industry.
Okay, so we have a lot of young listeners, sir. So tell us what the fairness doctrine is and how it led to the rise of talk radio and ultimately talk TV on the conservative channels and so forth.
But basically, there was what was called a fairness doctrine by the FCC, where basically the networks had to take neutral political stance, more or less. And Ronald Reagan did away with that doctrine. And at the same time, the purpose of the way the doctrine was able to be enforced was because the government, now I'm not a legal expert here, but the government legally controlled the airways.
Mm-hmm.
With cable, the government doesn't control the airways.
Mm-hmm.
So one could say whatever one wants on cable.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, although it would be questioned constitutionally, I think we have to go also look at the German constitutional amendment on hate speech. We have to get back to Oliver Wendell Holmes' famous quote about, you can't scream fire in a crowded theater. And that's exactly what's been happening here in political communication for the last 10 years. And screaming fire in a crowded theater.
I find the book to be very timely because it explains how we got to the position as use your words, a global liberal hegemon, how we became this very prosperous country and by and large benevolent country. Yes, we had some misstarts and failed wars, but they were generally trying to do the right thing, which was to keep the peace, if you will, around the world, suppress communism, suppress terrorism, etc. Not saying it always worked out our way, and not saying that we didn't have some failed missions, but in general, we've tried to do the right thing. And now we're at a crossroads again. So we're at the point in the podcast, so I don't know if you've listened to my podcast, but we put together 5 words and we ask our author to respond to these words, really taken from your book. And so you can give me a 1-word answer or a 1 or 2 sentence answer. If I say the 2 words foreign policy, you say what?
I say how the U.S. should act around the world.
Okay. If I say isolationism, what do you think of?
I would think of walls, whether it's tariff walls, whether it's walls against the world, whether it's walls against migrants. We build, and this is, I think, very important analogy that I've been thinking about. We build marginal walls.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because they're false walls.
Yeah. And so just again, for young viewers, what the Maginot Wall or the Maginot Line was, the French built these major fortifications in terms of trying to protect themselves from Germany. But in fact, the new technologies like aircraft and the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, it became very easy for the Germans to go around these walls. And so I think the professor's trying to make the point that the walls, they seem like they could potentially work, but they never really do, right? The Berlin Wall didn't work, frankly, and so many other things. So walls typically don't work. If I say the 2 words United States, you think what?
A dream, a hope, a very unusual experiment. The only multi-ethnic democracy that even tries to work in the world, really something that could be very positive.
Yeah, I mean, or as Lincoln said, right, the last best hope for mankind. It's this beautiful thing that we have to try to figure out a way to renew. I mean, one of my problems is that we have 27 amendments, but we haven't really had we had a procedural amendment in 93. Our last big meta amendment was in 19 1965, so that's 59 years ago.
Yeah.
It's just too long without another amendment. This is a living document. We're not amending it anymore, and it's putting a lot of stress in the system.
Well, think of this: the Senate. Wyoming has 2 senators. California has 2 senators.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Wyoming voter has much more power than the Californian voter.
No quitting makes you want to move to Wyoming, right? Because
exactly.
You got a lot of muscle in Wyoming. How about if I say the word NATO or the acronym NATO?
Once again, NATO. I think a brilliant policy put together by Truman, Atchison, and Marshall that's kept peace in Western Europe for 75 years.
Okay. What about free world? I said free world. You say what?
Free world. I think of the free world as a public relations remark by someone in the Eisenhower administration.
Right, but it's stuck, right?
It's stuck. Right.
Yeah, pretty interesting, right?
Right.
So, all right. Well, sir, the book is awesome. The title of the book is "The United States as Global Hegemon: How the U.S. Came to Lead the World," and it's written by Edward Goldberg, a professor at NYU. Thank you so much for joining us today on Open Book. Really enjoyed it.
Really enjoyed speaking. Had a lot of fun.